So, I set out to make a top 10 list of the horror films that shaped me, and it kind of got out of control. So, without further ado, here are the top 10 or 18 horror films that made me. Right. So, yeah, I I love these films. I love horror films. I love all kinds of films, but of course, horror films have a very special place in my heart. And given that this is a horror themed YouTube channel, horror, gothic, paranormal themed YouTube channel, I wanted to do a list of, and I've got various top tens planned because I love those kinds of things. I love watching those kinds of videos, reading those kinds of lists, and, figured I may as well do my own and see what you think of them. And I could make a top 10. Now, I'm terrible. I cannot choose favorites for anything, not favorite book, film, food, place, color, you name it. There's always a few that are contending for the top spot. And it's, I don't know whether it's because, I'm an academic at heart and I, got to think about, well, it's got these merits or those merits, or if I'm just wishy-washy. I don't know. Anyway, I thought I can at least make a top 10 list. And I sat down and, at the old computer, started typing up a top 10 list. And next thing I knew, it had spiraled out of control. And I ended up with a top 18 horror films that shaped me. Now, I just decided, you know what? Go with it. These are all films that have been near and dear to my heart for a very long time. I think pretty much all of them since childhood. And yes, I was the kind of kid who watched these kinds of films as a child. The list of 18, with the exception of the first one, these are in no particular order. And the only reason I've put the first one first is because it's the first I saw in the cinema. And that one is The Amityville Horror, 1979, directed by Stuart Rosenberg. And I was about 7-ish, I think, when I saw this film. And I went to the cinema with my grandmother and great-grandmother one afternoon. We had lunch, and then we went to see a movie, and this was the movie we saw. They were both big horror fans. I loved those kinds of stories, and apparently they had no problem taking me to see this film. And I don't think my mom was upset about it. I think she was all right with it ultimately. Except that maybe she wanted to go too and got left out. But, and she was the only one of us who had read the book, so it seems really unfair that she didn't get to come along on that trip. But, and being that age, I was going to be a big kid, and it wasn't busy. It was, like I say, it was the afternoon, so the cinema was not busy. It was a weekday afternoon, and I was going to sit by myself. And while they did sort of draw the line at that, because, okay, it was the 70s, kids had a lot more autonomy, but, my family was a bit more protective than some. And so they wanted me to sit at least near them. So the compromise was I would sit in the row behind them and watch this film. And I kind of did. I got creeped out enough that I stood behind them. That way I was right there with them, in some ways even closer to them than if I'd been sitting beside them, because I was like right by them. But I stood there watching this film, and even though I was scared, I loved it. And of course, particularly one of the things that stayed with me after that film, because it did kind of keep me up that night. I don't know that I had nightmares, but I had trouble falling asleep because two things related. The first, in the 1979 film, the daughter of the family was named Amy, and of course, I'm Amy. The other thing, again, related to her, and is that she and I both had in our bedrooms, in roughly the same position in relation to our beds, a child-sized rocking chair. And of course, in the film, one of the signs that Jody, the sort of spirit or demon or whatever it is that sort of talks to Amy and hangs out with Amy, and that she talks to. When Amy's parents will close the door at night after she's tucked in bed, you'll see the rocking chair rocking back and forth, and that's how you know that Jody is sitting there. And I remember laying in bed that night with the covers over my head, but a little sort of tunnel constructed under the cover so that I could watch that rocking chair. And I'd swear it moved. Did it move? Oh my God, you know. And I think that's how I fell asleep. Was terrified watching that my rocking chair. But yeah, it is such, to me it became a kind of quintessential haunted house film. And by this age, I had already lived in and had since moved out of a haunted house. Might tell you that story one of these days. And yeah, it felt, I think, it was a way for me to explore what another family, another child. The film is not told from Amy's point of view, but obviously, what she experiences is important in the film. And so I think for me, that's why it became one of the main reasons it becomes such an important film to me, to, how my interest in and ways of thinking about horror shaped and developed is, as I say, it's the first I saw in the cinema, and that's important. It's not the first film I saw in the cinema. I think that was Cinderella. I don't remember it. But the first horror film I saw in the cinema. What I love about this film is the way it tells the story of this haunting, the way that the various ghosts manifest to different people, and what it meant. It still resonates for me in a similar way to how it did as a child, and I think because I saw it as a child. So, absolutely, for me, even though I wouldn't call it my favorite horror film, I really don't know what my favorite horror film would be, it is an important film for me. Now, the rest of this list is in no particular order. It's just the order in which I wrote everything down. So, number 2 on the list is The Shining, directed by Stanley Kubrick, 1980. Now, I feel guilty. I feel very guilty loving this film because I'm very aware of the fact that Stephen King hates Kubrick's film. And I agree with his reasons, particularly after reading the novel, The Shining, and thinking about, because I already knew this when I read The Shining, that King hated the film version by Kubrick. He hated it so much, in fact, that he actually was involved in the production of a, I think, 2 or 3 part mini series for television that was a more faithful adaptation of the novel. It's good. It lacks the atmosphere. Kubrick was very intensely focused on getting the atmosphere for this film just right. That heavy, oppressive, and weirdly claustrophobic, given that this is a huge hotel. There's lots of grounds for them to run around, that big hedge maze, all of that. But they're trapped there and they know they're going to be stuck there by and large. That, yes, they've got a snowcat that if there's a really desperate situation, they can try and get down to the local town to get help, if they need medical help or something. But it's got to be damned serious because that in itself would be a dangerous trip. So they are effectively going to be trapped there all winter. There's something, with all the snow and just how big and empty and cold and oppressive this place is, how much tension there is, and of course the ambiguity. Is this place actually genuinely dangerously haunted, or is Jack just going crazy? And the one clue that it's not Jack just going crazy, although he, I think, is going crazy to a degree, is Danny, who, of course, is incredibly psychically gifted is also able to communicate with the hotel. In fact, and again, I mean, maybe part of it is, once more we have, a film around surrounding a child, and I saw this as a child, so maybe that was my window into this. Um, Danny, of course, has terrible experiences in the hotel. He is very aware right from the beginning that there's something wrong with the place. Even when his parents don't seem yet able to, they don't seem to have noticed it, but he notices almost immediately. Danny riding his big wheel around and occasionally encountering, various ghosts, and in particular, the little ghostly girls who stand there in the hallway and come play with us. Come play with us, Danny, forever and ever and ever. And you better believe that my identical twin nieces and my nephew are going to, at some point, if I have breath left in my body, cosplay, group costume at Halloween, the two little girls and Danny. Because at the age of 3, I'd already taught my nephew to say, red rum, red rum. Because that's the kind of aunt I am. Moving on. Number 3 on the list, and again, another one involving a child in the films, is the 1982 film Poltergeist, directed by Tobe Hooper. It's often thought of as a Spielberg film. He is a producer on the film, but he is not its director. As I say, it's Tobe Hooper, as in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And Hooper is, he creates a film here that is just, in some places, it is lyrically beautiful, particularly that moment when the paranormal team is there at the house and they're watching and capturing on film these various spirits, coming down the stairs, and particularly when they play it back in slow motion and the way the music comes in, this beautiful, lush, almost dreamy music, and these spectral images coming down the family's, the staircase in the family's home. There are moments like that, moments like the incredible, unfathomable bravery when Jo Beth Williams, Diane Freeling, the mother, is getting ready to walk through that, in through the closet, the children's closet, into this other dimension, this other realm, out, beyond this earth, to try and rescue her daughter. It's such a fantastic film. And of course, it plays on so many of the childhood fears that so many of us have, like the creepy clown dolls. Like, why don't they get rid of that doll? I don't understand it. That thing is terrifying. It is evil. And if somebody gave me that thing, I would have given it away instantly. And if it suddenly reappeared, I'd be having strong words with my parents on what we needed to do to make sure that thing stayed gone for good. The fear of the closet and what might be in the closet, the fear of the thing under the bed, all those childhood fears, as well as playing upon the fears of adults, particularly the fears of adults as regards their children and their roles as parents, that they have to protect their children, that they have to, do some terrible, gross, yucky things sometimes, like lovingly hold a dead canary and place it in a shoebox to bury it when their daughter's pet bird dies and, she's very upset about it, and hold a funeral for the bird, all the way through to possibly dying to save your child. And that one scene after, they've rescued Carol Ann, everything seems like it's okay, except the film keeps going and that we're not done yet. That moment when she realizes her children are in danger and she starts to run down the hall and the hall stretches and then it stretches again, and that idea of you can't get there fast enough. It's so real. It's how it feels to see the ones you love most in danger and you're trying to run to save them. And I think the way it plays upon children's nightmares and adults' nightmares at the same time, sometimes in the same moment, is just incredible. So, yeah, love this film. Love it. Love it. Love it. Now, number 4, a film I came to later. No, I don't think I wasn't a child. I was a teenager. I wasn't a little child. Let's put it that way. When I first saw this film, but I loved it just the same. And I later came to read the novel and fell utterly in love with it. And that is The Haunting, 1963, directed by Robert Wise, based upon, of course, an adaptation of the Shirley Jackson novel, The Haunting of Hill House. Now, there have actually been a couple of film adaptations of The Haunting of Hill House, both of them called The Haunting, the 1963 one, which I absolutely recommend, and the 1999 one. It had its moments. It had its moments. Saw it in the cinema. The audience around me definitely enjoyed it, but yeah. There is also, of course, if you're unfamiliar with either of those film versions, there is the Netflix series, The Haunting of Hill House. I love that series. It is incredibly well done. I'm not saying this against it. It's not really an adaptation. It's not real. It's riffing on, inspired by Jackson's novel, but it is not at all the story of The Haunting of Hill House, the novel. The 1963 The Haunting, however, it is. It is actually a very faithful adaptation. Interestingly, the house where it was filmed, the hotel and all where it was filmed, itself was haunted, and a number of the actors during the filming of it had very strange encounters. This is all sort of out there on public record. And that's another thing, and maybe that's something I should do a video on sometime, is horror films that have strange legends associated with them. Poltergeist does as well, for the record. The Exorcist does. There have been a few. But anyway, but as for me, yeah, I wasn't a young kid when I saw this. I was a teenager, but it really captured my imagination in terms of how this film was shot, how the story was told, and the ambiguity about Eleanor and about Nell and her sort of mental state. I wasn't unfamiliar with this idea because as a kid, I had an audiobook version of The Turn of the Screw, which of course very famously, we never know if the governess, whose name slips my mind, but whether she is really seeing ghosts or is just crazy. But yeah, go and watch it. It's a great film. It's an incredibly interesting story, and yeah, it means the world to me. I will always love this film. Number 5 on the list, again, in no particular order, is the ultimate classic, the 1931 film Dracula, directed by Todd Browning. This is the first horror film made in sound, for the record, in 100% sound, and it's a fairly early sound film. That means there's very little background music in this film, really almost none. And for my money, that's one of the reasons it is so atmospheric, because there's so much silence, maybe interspersed with a bit of ambient sound, the creaking of hinges, the footsteps, things like that. There's a quietness. And I think maybe this is more a modern perspective. I don't know. But that use of silence can be incredibly menacing. And to me, it's one of the things that makes this film effective. But I have to give love to Bela Lugosi, who plays Dracula and becomes the quintessential vampire, in terms of how, going forward, popular culture in the West would understand that character, the idea of the vampire. For decades and decades, every film, every vampire since has at least paid some kind of little tiny nod to Dracula, whether acknowledged or not. He absolutely is there in the background. And this is in large part down to Lugosi. Um, you know, his performance, that wonderful, the way he speaks, the way he delivers his lines, and that very evocative accent, and particularly lines like, listen to them, children of the night, what music they make. And it's an odd way of speaking, and it's his actual accent. He is not, for the record, putting on an accenting. But yeah, 1931, Dracula, you gotta see it. Now, moving on. This next one is a lot less well known, as is the novel that it is based on. I will at some point in the future be doing a video on this, but I've got to give a shout out here to The Uninvited from 1944. I know there have been other films released called The Uninvited, no relation to them. This is 1944, as I say, directed by Lewis Allen. Stars Ray Milland, Ruth Hussey. It's so creepy. It's so good. Now, interestingly, again, putting on my film historian hat, this is the first Hollywood horror film about ghosts. There had been films made by Hollywood that had ghosts in them before, but they tended to be romantic comedies or romantic dramas. And this is the first time we get a horror film about ghosts. Now, there are still some strongly comic elements in here. It's like they weren't quite ready to let go the whole romantic comedy side of this. And there is scope for including that in this narrative, as the novel is not comic at all. The novel, I've not finished it. I've only recently begun reading it finally. It took me a long time to get a hold of a copy of it. And I'm about not quite halfway through it at this stage. And it is very, straightforwardly serious drama, horror, paranormal drama. But the film does still retain those comic side to this kind of storytelling, but it is absolutely, definitely horror, and particularly as it concerns the ghosts. There are two ghosts in the film, and one of them is more of a guardian. The other is incredibly vindictive, evil, malicious, and literally is seeking to kill one of the characters in the film, and she nearly succeeds a couple of times before finally being defeated. And, again, this is a 1944 film, but when that ghost materializes, when we finally see her, I mean, it is creepy. And the special effects in this film, for all that there aren't many scenes that involve these special effects, when they do have them, I mean, they would hold up now as incredibly scary, menacing. It is so creepy. And I first saw this film when I was about 11 or so on TV with commercial interruptions. And it's just chilling nonetheless. So yeah, absolutely go see this, look out for this film. It is worth searching for. I have not been able to find it anywhere freely available, but it is out there. There have been DVD releases of it. I have a DVD of it myself. And it's worth it. It's worth the money. It's worth the effort to find and watch The Uninvited. Again, 1944, directed by Lewis Allen. Number 7 on the list, Cat People. Jacques Tourneur, 1942, the original and still the best. There have been adaptations of, or remakes, I guess is the better word, of this in more recent years, and a couple I think over the years. But there are just some, Simone is fantastic in this film. Everybody's very good in it. And there are a couple of scenes in particular where we see the cat that Simone turns into. It's such a great name, Simone. That she turns into out of jealousy and sort of sexual jealousy ultimately. Um, when she goes to menace the woman who she considers to be her rival, that are so creepy because they're so good. They again, I mean, we're well into the sound era here, so they're perfectly good at using sound effects, background music, and so forth. But there's in particular the scene, and it's a monster following her. But I think it's also a scene that a lot of people, especially a lot of women, can relate to, where she's left the office late. It's dark out. She's walking to um, she's walking home, and as she's walking down the street, and there's a wall on one side, there's the street on the other, so she's really got nowhere to go. She realizes someone is following her, and she can't see anybody. She just hears their footsteps, and she starts walking faster, and they start walking faster. And just when you think she's about to be caught, a bus pulls up, and she's able to, fortunately she's there, it stops and it lets her on, they let her on, and she's okay. But it's so good. It's so good. Again, another one that I've grown up with, I've always loved, and will always recommend. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, because this is a film that you need to see unfold. um it's fabulous. Now, I will say quickly, there is a sort of sequel that was done here. It's very good. I mean, there's nothing against it. Curse of the Cat People it's extremely effective, but it's kind of a sequel, but not really. It's odd. It's very odd. And I don't the film's title does not fit it at all. I definitely say watch it. It has a lot of the same cast in it, interestingly, but done in a very different kind of world and way. Even though some of them are playing the same characters, so it's kind of strange. I don't understand what they were thinking with this film, but go watch it. But yeah, it's not scary. I would not call it horror, even though it's got a very horror name. Um, the original Cat People, however, a fabulous film. Now, number 8 on our list, Psycho. 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Um, you know, it's another one of those where there might be some kind of supernatural element, but probably not. It's pretty much just poor old Norman Bates, whose mother is, how shall I put it? Not quite herself lately. Line from the film. And interestingly, the scene in this film that is the most iconic, the shower sequence where Marion Crane is murdered, stabbed to death in the shower, it owes very little of how we have seen it as an audience to Hitchcock. He actually filmed it as a single take, a continuous take. No cutting, no stopping, no changing angles, just one long uninterrupted take. And it just didn't work. And he also wanted no background music either. It just, it's not going to work. And it looked terrible. It just did not. It was a terrible scene. And Hitchcock was so losing confidence in this film that he actually was trying to figure out a way to get the studio to release it as a made-for-TV movie. TV was seen as very much the lesser medium. Cinema was here, TV was way down here. So it was a way to kind of save face. That's just a TV movie. But it's actually thanks to a combination of the graphic designer that Hitchcock had employed for a while now for the poster art and the credits and things like that for his films, Saul Bass, and his composer, Bernard Herrmann, who are the ones to take this film behind Hitchcock's back and cut it so that we get all those very strict, sudden, sharp jump cuts and bring in that music, that iconic theme music where the violins, sort of dragging the bow down, 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 is Mickey Mousing. This is the term, the stabbing of the knife, so that we get that, and it's fabulous. And when Hitchcock first saw it, he was furious. He had to be talked into, this will work better than what you did. And of course, it's now seen as one of the great cinematic moments ever. But not thanks to Alfred Hitchcock. So yeah, it's, again, it's the sort of the psychology of this, this is, again, like I was saying with The Haunting, this is part of that return to an interest in pop psychology, psychological drama, psychological horror. Yeah. So that's all I'll say for now about Psycho. Um, Go watch it. If you've never seen it, go watch it. It is fantastic. Interestingly, there was a prequel series done a few years ago called Bates Motel. Go watch that as well. It's in some ways doing its own thing, but it is also very much thinking of and referencing lovingly the 1960 film. And yeah, that's a good one as well. But Psycho, I remember the first time I saw that in particular, toward the end when we finally see Norman's mother face to face, and damn, that was creepy. Yeah, especially as a kid, but I think even as an adult, the first time you see that, it's like, holy moly. Anyway, moving on. Number 9 in my list, Jaws. Speaking of iconic movie music, yeah, John Williams's score for Jaws in so many ways, and Steven Spielberg would say this as well. In fact, he has said this is what really makes this film in so many ways. But you have to give love to the filmmakers, including Spielberg. I've read Jaws. I know there are those. In fact, I just recently watched a video that a guy did a couple of years ago where he lists his top 10 favorite horror novels of all time, and Jaws is way up there on his list. I think it's number 1 or 2. Um, I respectfully have to disagree. That was one of the worst books I have ever had the displeasure of reading. It's a man confronting his fears of the ocean, and the idea of being afraid of the ocean. I get it. I mean, it's a huge thing where you have very little power, very little agency. No matter how good a swimmer you are, the fish are better. And a big giant thing like a great white, it doesn't care about you. It doesn't care anything except you're there and it can eat you. And it is terrifying. But there's no supernatural side of this. There's no paranormal side of this. It's human against nature, which is quite a classic theme. But this time, we're lower down on the food chain by a long way, and that thing will stop at nothing. It is ruthless, and as Richard Dreyfuss's character says in the film, all I do is swim around and eat and make little baby sharks. Hooper says this, and it's it's not evil, but it's pretty scary to think about. And when we actually see, in particular, we see Peter Quint, the gnarled old sailor who had already survived an encounter as a sailor, I should say, on the USS Indianapolis, where the sharks are eating the sailors out of the water of their torpedoed ship. To see him being devoured by this shark, oh my God, it's scary. As a child watching this, watching this film on television. I didn't watch it when it came out. It was a few years after. But when I saw it, and it was on TV a number of times, on HBO a number of times, when I was a kid, and I watched it so many of those times, and I became terrified of going in even a swimming pool in case a great white came up out of the drain of the pool and ate me. And it still lingers at the back of my mind anytime I go into the water, and it's probably why I don't swim that often. But anyway, very effective, very menacing. The music, of course, is fantastic. Um, Go see it. It's a great film. Number 10 on the list, Rosemary's Baby, directed by Roman Polanski, 1968. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of Roman Polanski here. Honestly, I just don't have the time or the scope. Suffice to say, he was a garbage human being. You know, it is the story of a young woman who, she and her husband find this great apartment in New York. Her husband's an aspiring actor, and they've decided, we'll get this apartment, we'll get settled in, and when the time is right, we'll have a child. And suddenly his career's taking off. Shortly after moving into this building, his career begins to take off, and he's doing really, really well. And they decide, all right, it's time, let's have a baby. And after a very strange night and some very strange dreams, Rosemary discovers she's pregnant. Yay! Except, not so yay. I don't think I can possibly spoil this. I think most people watching this will be very aware that, of course, Rosemary's Baby is, in fact, the Antichrist, and those dreams she thinks she's having, those hallucinations, while she's in a drugged state. She's been drugged so that she can lay there and be used by the devil to bear his child. And so when she gives birth, although they take the baby from her and tell her it died, she does discover that the baby has lived and, in fact, is half her and half the devil, Satan himself. And, yeah. And the sort of dreamy lyricism of this sort of late 60s cinema, combined with the increasing sort of isolation, the gaslighting that Rosemary experiences, the way that it is also in its own way, oddly given who directed it, an intensely feminist film, in that it's pointing out the ways that no one will listen to Rosemary when she goes to her former pediatrician or obstetrician. When she goes to her former obstetrician seeking help, when she turns to this, and that, trying to think of how to get out of this, looking for help, and she just isn't listened to. She's, you're hysterical, you're whatever. And she's not. She knows what's going on. She's right. And at the end of it, she is left with the dilemma of, what do I do? She sees her child, but her child is the Antichrist. What does she do? And yeah, as a child, the idea of, her being pregnant with this baby that she is not what she thinks it is, the danger, the menace that she has been used unknowingly to bring evil into the world like this, that no one will listen to her, that no one will believe her because she's a woman, and a pregnant woman especially, because pregnant women apparently are crazy and unable to grasp reality. That's, to me, it is, yes, it's got paranormal elements, obviously, with Satan and so forth, but it is also very much feminist psychological horror. So, that's Rosemary's Baby. Definitely read the novel. We'll have to talk about it sometime, but go and watch the film as well. Right, so number 11 on our list, Carrie. This is the original a film of Carrie directed by Brian De Palma and released in 1976. And yeah, there are some real iffy things about this film. I am absolutely the first to admit, particularly at the very beginning of the film. And to me, Carrie as a film, and in particular, Carrie and Mrs. White, her mother, um, they are they are symbolic of what happens when oppression and religious fervor, and that in particular that very right-wing conservative religious Christian form of evangelical religion goes way too far. Because honestly, Mrs. White makes everybody look liberal. She is so controlling and so repressive that she hasn't even taught Carrie the basics of sort of life, or what happens with the female body or anything. So at the very beginning of the film, when Carrie hits menarche, aka she gets her first period, she has no idea what's happening. She thinks she's dying. And, it has to be explained to her at school. And this is down to Mrs. White, who has made sure to keep Carrie ignorant. It's not even innocence, it's ignorance. And to me, it was always this incredible example of what happens ultimately with that kind of repression. Everything goes too far, and plum. So, yeah, Carrie. I loved her magical powers, her psychokinesis, her strength, and then, of course, the revenge she gets is both horrific and incredible. And yeah, yeah, go see Carrie. I keep saying that, don't I? Go see it, go see it. But seriously, these films by and large are classic films, and they are worth seeing. Now, number 12, The Exorcist, 1973, directed by William Friedkin, based, of course, on William Peter Blatty's novel from 1971, I think. I am going to do a whole video on The Exorcist, the novel, the film, all of that. I've even visited The Exorcist stairs in Georgetown in DC. Big fan of this story. It's got some incredible moments in it, some incredible mise en scène. It's an excellent book. Definitely still relevant, definitely still works. Famously, of course, it tells the story of a young girl, Reagan, and her mother, Chris McNeil. Her mother's a famous actress. In the film, her mother's a famous actress. They're living in Georgetown while her mother is in a film. Unfortunately, Reagan finds herself with a little too much time on her hands and finds a Ouija board and begins communicating with something. And, it's a film where you again, in this wonderful way that truly Gothic horror can do, helps, or it shows the walls narrowing, the walls pushing in as more and more of the outside world gets cut off until the world of the main characters shrinks to this tiny, helpless, dangerous place. And of course, the way that the story is told, the way it unfolds, that is the thing that I always found so fascinating. And watching Chris, the mother, desperately try to help her child and hit wall after wall after wall. And finally, she, of course, is able to get help. The priests are able to exorcise the devil from Reagan at great expense to themselves. In fact, both priests die. and Reagan is okay, and she and Chris, of course, leave as you would, um, and they are both very changed by the experience. They have because Reagan remembers more than she lets on is kind of what's hinted. She's forgotten a lot. She doesn't remember understand a lot, but she knows enough. And it's just the characters are so well drawn. They're so well acted by by the performers, by the actors in the film. Um, and it is a haunting film in so many ways. Um, and as I say, the use of the music in particular really helps to punctuate this, and the use of silence. You there is spectacle. There are special effects, practical, of course, special effects. They are used well, and never does this film feel hokey or silly, at least not to me. So it's it's a historically interesting film. Um, it's a production wise, it's an interesting film, but it is also a really well told story, and a really creepy one. Right. So number 13, Halloween, the original 1978 Halloween, directed by John Carpenter. Again, some great music, supposedly composed by Carpenter himself. Apparently, his father was a professional musician, so he does have his own use of musical training and talent and all that. And yeah, wrote a great piece of theme music for it. Um, and of course, again, this is a really well told story on a budget. And it's often remembered as the first of the slasher films. That's not technically true. You actually get Black Christmas a few years before in 1973, I think. Um, but Halloween is much better remembered, possibly because it is set at Halloween. And there's a story that they were actually going to call this film The Babysitter Murders. That was the original title, that was the working title for a lot of it. And somebody started talking about wishing they could use the word Halloween as the title. But of course, there's so many films with Halloween in the title. And then they looked it up, and actually, there weren't any films with Halloween in the title. And since it's set at Halloween, sort of plays on the idea, that Michael Myers is the boogeyman, aka the bogeyman. It's like, yeah, Halloween is the real hook here. This is what we want to play up. And so you get a bunch of very young, inexperienced actors, some with more experience than others, to include a couple of people who'd come from being in Carrie just a couple of years before. And particularly PJ Souls, she's in both Carrie and Halloween. And, the way it unfolds, and this idea of, the final girl, this is where the idea of the final girl really comes from, is this film, arguably. And Laurie Strode, the way she pushes through, the way she survives, how practical and pragmatic she is, and how, she's the babysitter you want to hire, because come hell or high water, she will keep your children safe. And she, it's such I don't know, I'm just kind of gushing now, but it is a great film, and I highly recommend it. Okay. I'm going to try and whip through the last few of these on the list, because I'm very aware that this video is getting very long, and I've already probably had to edit out lots anyway. So let's go on through my list here and do these last 5 films relatively quickly, as quickly as I can. So number 14, I'm not going to say a huge amount about this. It because it kind of needs no introduction, and that is the original 1922 Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau. Notoriously, this was a copyright breaking sort of bastardization of Dracula. And Bram Stoker's widow actually sued the production and won for copyright infringement, that they had no right to make this film, and ordered that all copies and prints, all prints and negatives of the film be destroyed. But it's supposedly the case that about 10 prints of the film managed to survive, and it's from those that we have this film. And it's such a creepy film, It's some ways, yes, it's a little bit hokey, but it's obviously it's a great example of German expressionism. It's dealing with all kinds of ideas of disease and contagion. Of course, 1922, that's just a couple of years after the Spanish influenza pandemic that follows World War One and kills so many people. And the idea of disease and contagion being brought by the vampire, I mean, this fits beautifully with the sort of socio-cultural, historical, political environment um, in the world as a whole at that time, but I think particularly in Germany, because of course Germany was very much being punished for World War One, and this is of course a German film, and it is shot in such eerie ways. The way that effects are done in the film is incredible. Yeah, there's one or two moments like particularly where um, the vampire sort of rises up out of the grave, sort of like that's a bit phallic, a bit very hokey. But let that go. There are some incredible moments in this film in terms of the way that shadow and light are used. The cinematography in some sections, it is a fantastic film. And if you can manage to get to a performance of it where it's being screened with live musical accompaniment, because of course this is a silent film, it's the only silent film on my list, um, definitely go see it because it adds a whole other layer to this film. I've managed to get to see it like that a couple of times, and it's even better. Okay, so number 15, Night of the Living Dead, directed by George Romero, 1968. Not the first zombie film, it must be said, but the big zombie film, the first big zombie film to spawn all the other zombie films that come along after. Beginning with that great line, they're coming to get you, Barbara, and, just spiraling out from there. Um, Famously an independent film, a very small budget film. Romero would talk in later years about this film, about how once they had put the film together and all, they literally drove it, put it in the car and drove across country with it to take it to, I think, New York Film Festival or someplace like that, to try and get interest in it and so forth, and distribution for it and all of that. And he's not, and he said, I wasn't making a political point by having my hero of the film be a young black man. He was just the best actor of the people I knew, so I put him in the lead role. In a way, that kind of doesn't matter because the result is a film that fits perfectly into the sort of chaotic cultural landscape of 1968, where you have the civil rights movement going on, there are assassinations, there is political unrest related to, and protests related to Vietnam War. There is, sort of cultural tensions, social tensions, political tensions. Things are challenging. And in amongst all of that is this, this little microcosm of America in the late 1960s distilled into this monster movie. And it works beautifully. And the fact that it's shot in black and white, I think, adds to that. It just makes it that much, I don't know, it makes it more visceral and also more uncanny. It makes things more menacing because, again, the way you can use light and shadow, particularly in black and white cinematography, really allows for that in ways that color just doesn't. Nothing against color, of course, but um, so yeah, Night of the Living Dead. It scared the shit out of me as a child. Um, but I loved that, and the idea of, the sort of, again, the claustrophobia, where all the people who end up trapped in the farmhouse and trying, sort of fighting each other even while they're fighting these outside forces. It was a frustrating, fascinating, frightening film to me, and I never ever forgot that feeling. So, number 16 of 18, we're almost there. An American Werewolf in London, directed by John Landis, 1981. For one thing, even though I live in Yorkshire, I have yet to walk the moors at night, and this film is probably a big part of the reason why. It just seems like a real bad idea, especially, under a full moon, because who knows what's lurking out there. The moors are very big, very open, very dangerous. It's very easy to get lost in them. And yeah, I can believe you could meet a vampire. And of course, you have the story of these two young guys who are just backpacking, hiking around as tourists. And unfortunately, they end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. One of the guys is killed and the other survives, but is infected and himself becomes a werewolf at the next full moon. And the story of the film, the acting of the film, the humor of the film is all great. But what always stood out to me, and of course it stood out to a lot of people, is the incredibly elongated scene when our main character first transforms into a werewolf. And rather than having it, happen over 20 or 30 seconds, it goes on for, I think, 5 minutes of the film. And it's incredibly painful as well as distressing. He doesn't just watch it happen quite placidly. It, such as in, say, the Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr. He sees this happening and he watches as, his hand just deforms into a wolf's paw and all of this. So it's a real instance of body horror. And while normally I'm not a fan, in this case, it really makes you grapple with, and this is, I think, Landis has actually said this was part of his thinking, is we never see what the werewolf goes through when he transforms. And that can't be pleasant. It can't be easy. It has to be painful. And so that's what we see. And of course, you can make all kinds of metaphors about what this means, why the werewolf changes, why the werewolf exists. The boy's done nothing wrong. He's not a bad guy or anything like that. He's just unlucky. And I think that's the ultimate part of this, is the ultimate threat of the werewolf, is you don't necessarily do anything to deserve being attacked and transformed and turned into a monster who goes and kills people. And of course, in American Werewolf in London, he is haunted by some of his victims. But yeah, it's just the idea of that happening to you. What if I got bitten by a werewolf and became a werewolf? It's about dealing with that, understanding that, making peace with that, and finding a way to put a stop to it. And yeah, it's just a great story. And like I say, the transformation scene, wow, was that a hell of a part of the film. So, number 17, The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, 1963. One of the two Hitchcock films that have made my list. These are my two favorite Hitchcock films of all time, Psycho and The Birds. Well, two of them. Shadow of a Doubt is my all-time favorite, but it's noir, it's not horror. The Birds, Hitchcock himself described this in the trailer as the scariest film he'd ever made. And it's, it's like Jaws in the sense that there's nothing paranormal. It's just the birds, nature starts attacking, getting revenge for all of the abuses that it has undergone at the hands of humans. And the birds fight back, beginning in this one little place, this little tiny community on the California coast called Bodega Bay, or just off the California coast in a little island community. And it's terrifying and it's brutal. And it's funny, this film, it's like I'd seen it for years and years growing up, and I'd always loved it, but I didn't find it particularly frightening. And then finally, I was in my early 20s and it came on TV and I had nothing to do. It was a Sunday evening and I was just taking the evening off and relaxing. And oh, the birds, made a cup of tea, sat down to watch it. And it finally hit me that how scary this film was. And by the end of it, even though I knew the film backward and forwards, I was sitting there clutching a pillow, just terrified. And I think why this film finally hit home with me as a genuinely frightening film is I was finally old enough by the time I'd hit sort of 23, 24 to understand just how weird and random the world can be. How the most outlandish things can and do happen, and there's not a thing you can do about it. You just have to find a way through it and hope you make it. And that's, while yes, there are all these themes of, sort of nature against humans and all of that going on, potentially, I don't know if this is it's probably historically anachronistic to say this, but you could certainly read from our perspective now sort of environmentalist messages into it and that sort of thing. Though I'd be surprised if that was in Hitchcock's mind. It's not entirely impossible. Certainly whether or not it was in du Maurier's mind, Daphne du Maurier, who wrote the story that this is based on. That's, Daphne du Maurier's in Rebecca, another great film, great by Hitchcock, a great novel, Gothic novel. But I think that for me, that was why this film so hit home and why it belongs on this list, is because it exemplified that the danger of the randomness of the world and that weird stuff does happen. Growing up, the adults are always reassuring you, oh, that couldn't really happen. It's just make-believe. It's just a film. It's just a book. It's just a story. Growing up is understanding that no, weird stuff happens. For real. It's not always just a film, just a book, just a story. So yeah. Heavy stuff on that one, isn't it? But last but not least, you'll be delighted, I'm sure, to know that this is the last one. Finishing off on a very different note, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. This is a 1949 Disney package feature, and it's directed by James Alger, Clyde Geronimi, and Jack Kenny. But The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad, the first half of it, for our purposes in this, does not count. Now, there's nothing wrong with it. It's actually a lovely little film, half film, that's based on The Wind in the Willows and is the story of Mr. Toad and the motor car. It's the second half of the film that we're interested in today, because that is an adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. Of course, the main character of that is Ichabod Crane, hence the name of this film, The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. And the entire segment is narrated and sung by Bing Crosby and a few other people who contribute singing to the film, but it's predominantly Bing Crosby, and it is a very faithful, the most faithful adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow to date. The Tim Burton film from, was it 1993, 94? Um, I mean, it's fine, but it has almost nothing to do with The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Although, interestingly, Tim Burton, who, of course, famously begins his film career, professional film career as a Disney animator, he obviously knows this film very well, and he lifted a lot of the mise en scène for sections of his film from The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow section of it, which is the second half. But as I say, this is an intensely faithful version of, or adaptation of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And it's so charming, so funny, so lighthearted until Ichabod is at the party at the Van Tassel's farmhouse, and Brom Bones, his archenemy, gets up and sings to us about the legend of the Headless Horseman. And the tone shifts, and the music shifts, and then Ichabod, of course, leaves, and he's headed home. And what has been up till then a very lively film full of music and narration and so forth, it suddenly gets very quiet. And even the narration, the voiceover narration from Bing Crosby, becomes much more sparing. Until suddenly, it explodes with the headless horseman's arrival. And as a child watching this, chills, delicious chills. I loved it. To this day, and I mean, it no longer scares me in the slightest, but it is not Halloween without it. And it is one of my favorite films of all time. I don't have favorites, but it definitely ranks up there, not just amongst favorite horror films or kids' horror films, but films of all time. Not a year goes by in my life that I don't see this at least once or twice. And it's just, I love the music. I love the way the story is told. And, just the way the film just so effectively uses music and imagery and voiceover narration. It is masterful. So, I'm not going to say best for last, but in terms of horror films that shaped me, this one has had a major, major impact. So, there we go. 18 horror films that shaped me, that helped me to find the things in horror, the Gothic and paranormal that I love the best, that have resonated with me in various ways, most of them from childhood to the present, and that I highly recommend you go and find and watch for yourself, each and every one. So, what are your favorites? What are the ones that you feel like have shaped you, have made you fall in love with horror, or the kinds of horror that you might gravitate to? What do you think of my list? What would be on your list? Do we have any in common, or were you like, no, she's completely wrong, none of those films? But yeah, that's, let me know. Do say in the comments, if you care to, what your favorite films are. And if there are any films that you'd particularly from this list, I mean, I've said there are a few that I really want to go back to and visit in full-length videos, but if there are any you'd like me to really get to sooner rather than later, do please let me know. And that's all. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time for another glimpse into Gothic, horror, and paranormal from my perspective. See you later. Bye.